What's up, guys? In this video, I'm going to be summarizing this textbook, Writing Fiction by Janet Burroway. This is the 10th edition of the textbook, and I have just finished it for my fiction writing class. And I am aware that some people don't have time. You should read it, but if you don't have time, there's a lot of good stuff to learn in this book. So I'm going to be doing a very brief rundown of each chapter of this book. It will not cover everything that was covered in the book, so I truly recommend that you read the textbook. Um, this goes over many aspects. I'll read out the chapters now because there will not be timestamps in this video, so if you know what order they go in, then you can watch the board. So chapter 1 is the writing process. Chapter 2 is showing and telling. Chapter 3 is characterization part 1. Chapter 4 is characterization part 2. And then chapter 5 is fictional setting. 6 is plot and structure. 7 is point of view. 8 is comparison. And finally, chapter 9 is revision and theme. So first, we are going to start with chapter 1. Chapter 1 is the writing process. So this is the topic of our first chapter. So basically what Burroway is saying in this chapter is talking about the general process of writing and the things that you can do to ensure that you write things in a timely manner and thoughtfully. So, and it's completely okay when you're not on a time crunch to write a book over the span of like 50 years or write a short story in the span of about 6 months. But let's say, for example, you're in a college course and you need to write your short story in 2 weeks. Then obviously you need to have yourself at a more rigorous standard than if you were writing leisurely, for example. So there's a few tips that Burroway goes over in this textbook specifically to help with that. Um, the first one is to make a schedule, and this schedule does not need to be set in stone, and you don't need to follow it like it's the Bible. However, that is the first step. So, making a schedule is very helpful, especially, as I said before, when you are on a time crunch, when you don't have all the time in the world to write a story. Um, I'm going to be talking in the context of college students mostly. This can also apply to high school students that want to get ahead in their creative writing ventures, I guess. But let's say you're a college student, you have a class from like, you have classes from like 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., and that's your block. Then maybe you can say, treat, not saying that creative writing and your passion should be treated as a class and like as a liability. However, it would be a good idea to set aside about 3 hours a week at minimum for writing. So let's say you have classes Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Then maybe you can say Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I will write from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. And in that case, you have allotted yourself 3 hours of time totally dedicated to writing for your week. And in that time, you can write about pretty much anything. We'll get to free writing later. That will be one of the points of this chapter. But hopefully, you're picking up what I'm putting down. The best way to get better at writing is to write, no matter what it's about, really. Just as long as you can figure out who you are as a writer by indulging yourself in the craft, then that will lead to some, growth. And then the second thing that Janet Burroway suggests, and this is a very good idea, honestly, and you've probably heard it if you have taken any writing class, because most teachers, if not all of them, recommend this, is to keep a journal. And when I say journal, I'm not necessarily talking about a diary. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking more about a place to keep all of your thoughts in regards to your writing. So think of it almost as like my journal. And I don't have it with me, of course, but my journal is like very small. It can fit in my pocket. And every time that I, you know, overhear something where I'm like, that I could use that in a piece, or I can, take inspiration from this. It could be like a type of person that you encounter or a conversation that you overhear in the cafeteria or something. If that rings a bell in your mind, then uh, it's important enough to note in your journal. And then once you have time to write because of the schedule that you should make, um, then you can go back to your journal and say, you have this collection of ideas in your journal. And you don't need to go crazy with this. Like, you don't need to be walking around, you know, listening and writing stuff down every 5 minutes. But if you hear something that, sets off that artistic alarm in your head, then you should write it down, because in most cases, if it's a minor detail in your day, you will not remember it when you get home. So if you think that it will help, then you should write it down. And then the third thing is very simple, and I probably don't even need to write it down. Um, but it is to write about things that you care about. Now, in some cases, like in academic writing, you really don't have a choice whether you can write about something that actually resonates with you. However, in creative writing, unless there's a very specific prompt or something, which is still a good exercise, if you can write about anything that you want, write about something that you feel strongly about or something that connects with you. You know, if you're, you know, a political person, you could write about something to do with a like cause that you care a lot about, or something like that, or a cause that you feel like feelings against. And that's just one example. And in terms of politics, don't turn it into an essay or a lecture. Make it a like filter your emotions towards this topic. Don't know what the topic is, but anything, politics, or like um something completely different, like personal experiences or something like that, or even just a school subject. You can write about so many different things. Make sure that you don't make it into an academic piece. What you're trying to do is make up characters and have them go through something. And you can use your passion to make the characters do anything. It's your piece. So, and that's a lot easier when you care about what you're writing about. So, I don't know. For example, if if you decide, oh, I'm gonna write about um, I don't know, wildfires effect on baby bears, and you don't care at all about that, which you should, but if you don't care about baby bears and wildfires, and you try to write this really grasping piece about a bunch of baby bears trying to escape a wildfire, it will probably shine through in your piece that you don't care about baby bears and wildfires. So you might as well just write about something else because yes, some ideas come to us that aren't good ideas or aren't good ideas for us, or maybe we need to let them sit in our journal for a little bit longer before we decide to make it into a piece. So, yeah, take that into consideration that you should really care about what you're writing. And then next up is free writing. This is very important, free writing. Um, as I said before, make a schedule and make yourself write for at least 3 hours a week, or however long you'd like to write per week. It could be 30 minutes a week. Um, but some of you might be thinking, well, I don't have an idea, so I don't know what I would be writing in those 30 minutes a week. Well, free writing is a great solution. You don't always need to be writing a novel or a short story or even flash fiction. You don't need to be writing anything substantial. I mean, it would be great if you were, but if you sit down and during your scheduled time to read or write, I don't know why I said read, but if you don't have an idea, just sit there and think of something. And I know that sounds easier said than done, and it is, but if you're sitting at a desk with a piece of paper in front of you and your phone is not in front of you and this is your time for writing, you something will happen and it might not be great, but you'll still have this idea that happened to you on a random Tuesday on paper, and then eventually something might come into your brain that is related to what you wrote that day, even if it's complete garbage. The whole entire point is perfecting your craft and making it better, and uh, writing with a schedule and free writing is a great way to improve your vocabulary. You know, like it'll help you do many things in writing. You know, vocabulary, descriptive words, imagery. You don't need to be writing about anything. Just treat it like when your English teacher in high school would just force you to write for a couple minutes and you couldn't really do anything about it. Think of it like that, but it's your own. It's your own now. That's pretty much it. And then the next point is asking questions in fiction is much more important than answering them. And this is extremely important. Forgot how to spell for a second. Okay. Asking questions in fiction is much more important than answering questions. Um, in many novels that I read that are critically acclaimed, for example, I will pick Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. That's a high school read, but I think it's a very substantial book. Um, it poses a lot of questions, such as, you know, simple things, the difference between right and wrong. What is wrong in that book, and what is right? And people in varying perspectives that read this book have different answers. They are on various sides, and, you know, I probably could have picked a different book that would show my point better, but readers, when they're reading a book, usually, especially with fiction, they don't crack open a book and they're like, I want to figure out like the definite answer to this hypothetical question that I have, um, or something, because fiction is not nonfiction. You're not necessarily doing what I'm doing now and lecturing. You are, showing an experience of a character, an experience, a life, a glimpse into a setting at a certain time. You're not, you're not, you know, writing a nonfiction book. So personally, when I read fiction books, the best feeling is when I finish a book and it leaves me thinking about, you know, an ethical or philosophical point, and it leaves me wondering, like it gives me something to think about, you know, and that is a result of the author asking questions, very indirectly asking questions, but opening people that read books open-mindedly are always left when they're reading a good book with wonder after the book, even if the book has a very concrete ending in terms of what the characters have done and what the characters' outcomes were. Even then, an ideal question will still be there. And then the next point is, well, this is kind of more of an idea, but in terms of writing, this kind of ties into the caring aspect, but it is always a great idea to write from your life, but not too much. There's a bridge between fiction, which is completely fake, like in terms of like what has actually happened. Fiction books, yes, they can gather ideas from the author's life and what the author has gone through throughout his or her life. However, it's not a memoir. A memoir is a retelling, sometimes with fiction elements, but a retelling of what the author has gone through in their life. It's literally almost an autobiography. Um, and it's always a great idea while writing fiction to write from your life, because that way you can really power some emotion into what you're writing, and you can make it very real, and you can know a lot about the topic that you're writing about. However, um, if you write with only what you've gone through in mind, then you're limiting yourself. And the best thing to do in that situation, when you're writing something and it's good and the idea is still viable, but you're catching yourself writing a memoir rather than fiction, is to not focus on the experience that you had, but the way that the experience made you feel. So basically, I guess what I'm trying to say is, one thing that Janet Burroway said in her piece was that you have to take take things from your life like a cook in a cupboard. Um, the cupboard has many ingredients in it, you know, salt, pepper, flour, bunch of random stuff. And you can make the same bread that you made, or the same bread that you ate when you went through the experience that you went through. Or you can use all of the same ingredients that um, formed that experience that you went through and bake something new. So you can channel all of those emotions that what you went through, um, you know, how that experience made you feel, but write something completely different. Let's say that you want to write about the loss of, like, your feeling of grief. You lost someone in your life and you want to write about that grief because that feeling was so strong in you, and you feel that, you know, that is the best emotion that I can describe because I feel like I spent so much time in that place. Don't write about exactly what happened to you. Let's say that your pet died. Try not to write a story where the pet dies, but try to write a story where, in some way, through some other mode, your main character ends up in the place that you were. But don't make it exactly what happened to you, but try to use that emotion that you felt as kind of a path to your creativity. And you have to build a new house around yourself and your ideas. So I guess I'll just say experience. I don't even know if you guys can read this. This is very small. And then the next point um, is to consume fiction. And this is something that I find very important, honestly. Um, a lot of times, especially in academic life, it's very frowned upon to kind of like sit on your butt and like watch movies, play video games, and like read books. Well, reading books, not so much. But one of the best ways to gather ideas is to consume creative art. And creative art is very, very, very broad. You can watch a movie and it will, you know, give you a light bulb in your mind. And same thing with video games. I'm not a big video games person, but I can imagine, especially some video games have storylines, and there has to be aspects from those storylines that really strike you in some way and can give you, building blocks to make make something out of the idea that the somebody else's work has given you, which segues into the next point, which is to imitate others. And this, I want everyone to take very, very, very lightly. By imitate, I don't mean I'm going to rewrite Indiana Jones as Indiana Jones doing Indiana Jones stuff. I mean, like, let's say this is a very strong point in terms of books. Maybe not so much with movies or anything, but books, you can, you know, use tropes or character relationships. Take very small aspects from your favorite books and make your own story out of it. That's the best. That's probably one of the best pieces of advice, honestly. You know, especially with consume and imitate. You know, watch movies, read books, even listen to music. That's another good one. Do those three things, and eventually you'll have something, an inspiration. And sometimes your inspiration, what you get from these pieces of media, will be not even in like related to the pieces of media that you've consumed at all. It's just something that you had in your subconscious that was dug up by experiencing these things. All right. That is the first chapter of Janet Burroway's Writing Fiction, A Guide to Narrative Craft. Um, and I don't know if I'm going to make a whole nother video for the other chapters or if I'm going to not, but we'll see. All right. Bye.